Well, bon dia, everyone. I want to thank the people from the Ministry of Education for inviting me to these sessions that you're doing all around the country. It's very exciting to see this work actually coming to fruition and being implemented in Portugal. My name is Lizanne Stefano, and I'm a faculty member at the Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta, Georgia. And I had the honor of working with a team from the European agency who was asked to create a system to monitor the implementation of the inclusive education legislation in Portugal. So what we were asked to do is come up with a set of standards. So we have 6 standards, and then indicators, or a little bit smaller, more fine-grained versions of the standards to help people in schools and people in the community and people in the ministry measure progress toward implementing inclusive education in Portugal. So one of the things that we did as a research team is we reviewed all of the relevant documents for Portugal. We also did comparison studies, cross-country studies with Sweden and Estonia to find out their practices and to see how their inclusive practices compared with those in Portugal as a way of figuring out, well, what would some common standards be? And then we got to take those draft standards and indicators and go out into the field. And so we worked with 16 clusters of schools all across Portugal. We got to talk to school leaders like yourselves. We got to talk to teachers, therapists, other support personnel, and members of the community to find out about inclusive education in Portugal. We also talked to students and families, which was a very important piece of that. And one of the things that we found out in this field testing was that the standards and the indicators worked pretty well, and that they were a good way for families and students, for school personnel, and for people in government to really understand what was happening in inclusive education in their schools and in their regions. But the other thing that we found out was how important school leaders are in the process of inclusive education, and also how important it is to collect data and to pay attention to what's happening in your schools, what's happening with your students, as a way of understanding how inclusive education is working in your districts. So I'd just like to say a little bit about our framework and to talk about how school leaders play such an important role. The first standard is inclusive values, principles, and policies are shared and accepted by all. This was something that we found to be very, very common in Portuguese. We gave this our highest level of implementation because we felt like there was common understanding of the values and the policies associated with inclusive education, and that people bought into the idea of inclusive education was a quality education. They weren't competing, but in order to have a quality education, it has to be inclusive. You have to have all the people in the community engaged in the education process, and education needs to be geared to the individual needs of students. So we found this to be a real strength in Portugal, and school leaders are particularly important in advancing this idea of inclusive education values, because they set the tone for their teachers, they set the tone for the families in their schools, they set the tone for the students, that this is a place where everyone's needs are considered and met. The second standard has to do with resources. The required financial, human, and technical resources are mobilized and available to support inclusive education. And here school leaders are at the center. School leaders were seen as the central figure to understand what resources are needed by their school, and then to communicate with the ministry, with the regional offices, with the local community to get those resources. So again, the role of the school leader in assembling the resources that are necessary to have an inclusive environment was absolutely key. And it's really important for the school leader to continue to monitor those resources, to add new resources when necessary, and to really spend time considering what resources are most important for us to do the work that we need to do in this school. The third standard deals with the organization and management of the school. Schools are managed autonomously to support all learners in the most appropriate way. Part of the Portuguese legislation is really empowering schools to be able to do what they need to do to serve the learners that they serve. And again, school leaders play a pivotal role in being able to manage and organize the environment to be able to support the range of learners in their schools. Multidisciplinary teams also were very important in this regard to help advise the school leaders about what sorts of accommodations, what sorts of management structures, what sorts of organizations would best serve the needs of the school. But again, school leaders set the tone, set the organizational structure for their teachers and families and students, and so their role was particularly important. Standard 4 is that learners' and families' voices are respected and considered. This was also something that many schools rated very highly on, particularly with respect to family engagement. School leaders and teachers, members of the multidisciplinary teams, definitely understand that families are to be engaged in this process and that family buy-in and family approval is very important. One of the things that we saw that maybe could use a little bit more work, it's not as explicit in the legislation as the family involvement, is learner involvement. So learners should also be involved in identifying their needs, talking about what resources they want, helping to plan their educational program. And again, the school leader is very important for creating opportunities at the grade levels, in their individual conferences, in the school as a whole, to be able to hear learners' voices about the directions that the school wants to go and what individual learners need for their own success. The fifth standard is training and professional development are effective and accessible. Again, school leaders play an incredibly important role here. There is national training available, there's regional training available, there's lots of different resources in Portugal around inclusive education to help people learn what they need to know to do inclusive education well. But school leaders are the ones that set the tone in their school that professional development is valued, that their teachers should be engaged in professional education on inclusion, and provide the release time and the resources to be able to have a well-trained staff. One of the things that we found out in our travels around Portugal is that for teachers quite naturally engage in professional development on inclusive education, but that really a much broader range of people need to have experience with inclusive education. Support personnel, non-teaching personnel in the school, the bus drivers, the people who work in the cafeterias, the people who deal with other aspects of the school, budgeting and finance and human resources. And also, all teachers need to be engaged, not just those teachers that are closest to delivering services to students with special needs, but also every teacher in the school. Because an inclusive education means everyone in the school is getting their own individual needs met and their own individual progress is clear. So again, school leaders, very important for setting that tone. And the final standard is success and certification. So that the real goal of inclusive education is to have everyone be successful, to have everyone leave school with the skills that they need to be independent in life, to earn a living, to be a contributing member of society. So those metrics and those success stories are very, very essential to an inclusive education program. Again, school leaders set the tone because collecting data, using data to make decisions, using data to identify what practices work well and where there's still needs are all things that are important when school leaders are moving their schools along on an inclusive education pathway. There's a lot of data available in Portugal. The Ministry of Education collects a lot of data. It's publicly available on websites, regions have data, individual schools have data. It's really important to be able to have time to go through that data and set some goals and standards about what does success mean for students in the school and what percentage of students are achieving success as they move from this school and move on to whatever the next phase of their education is. I'm very, very happy that this work is moving forward and being disseminated across Portugal, and I wish you luck on your training today and luck as you move forward with inclusive education in Portugal. Thank you very much.